Excellency, Director General, when we spoke at Davos, we talked about aid and the delivery of aid and the difficulties of aid getting to and from, the trade barriers that might be in place. There's a very sharp reminder now, isn't there, that this isn't an esoteric discussion. This isn't an academic issue. There's a real problem. Do you know how is the trade situation coping with Turkey and Syria?
Well, thank you, Richard. Let me just say that, of course, my heart goes out to all those. As a mother and grandmother, it's really sad when you see particularly the children impacted by this. On the issue of the aid and the movement of goods and services, because when you have a natural disaster like this, you're going to need goods and services to move in order to recover. We actually have at the WTO something called a Trade Facilitation Agreement that went into effect in 2017, and it's meant to sweep away the customs barriers and make it just that much easier to move things around. This has been 75% implemented by our members, and so that is helping. The second thing I want to say is that in June last year, members of the WTO undertook to make sure they put absolutely no export restrictions, no barriers in the way of humanitarian food aid for the WFP so that it can help those who have been impacted. So members of the WTO, I think, have stepped up.
Does there need to be more? Does there need to be almost a special aid protocol that as soon as you declare it to be valid and this is an aid situation, different rules apply? Does there need to be more?
Well, I like that idea, Richard. I think we could think about that. Already we have the things in place, but can they become automatic immediately an event happens?
You declare
Absolutely.
In the same way that you declare a disaster, therefore new
different rules apply.
You could see that?
Yes.
Excellent, we've made progress already.
My members have not agreed it yet, but we'll get there.
Oh, come on. What, before I retire?
No. Maybe before, much before that. You have a long way to go, Richard.
You're very kind. The trade agenda has never been more important. But as we come out of the pandemic, I now wonder, what do you see as the most significant thing you need to put right?
Well, Richard, as we come out of the pandemic, there are lots of challenges in the way. We listened to Professor Schwab earlier, and he said there are transformations, there are crises that we're trying to deal with in the way of trade. We've got this earthquake in Turkey. We've got climate change and a lot of impact from that, disasters in different parts of the world. And the pandemic, although it has abated, there's still some worries.
Well, what's your biggest...
all of these things have had an impact on trade, where we've seen our forecast has been that this year in 2023, we'll see a 1% growth in merchandise trade, a drop from 3.5% last year. So it certainly had an impact on trade, but there seem to be glimmers of hope on the horizon.
Okay, so you had a bounce back year last year.
Yeah.
You then have a fall back because of, say, general economic situation, slowdown in the global economy.
Yes.
But is there something structural that needs to be addressed?
Well, put it this way, I think there are some structural issues that we've seen, some vulnerabilities, if you will, and those have to do with the way supply chains are organized. I believe that for trade to be more resilient in the future, we've seen at least how during the pandemic and the war, some supply chains have been quite vulnerable. Pharmaceutical supply chains, the concentration is 80% of vaccines, for instance, exported by 10 countries in the world. Semiconductor supply chains, concentration of manufacturing in 1 or 2 countries. Even food and fertilizer from the Black Sea. So I think the question we need to ask ourselves for the future of trade is, how do we build better resilience in those supply chains?
The reality, as you ask that question, is do it yourself at home or get your friends to do it nearby, friendshoring. The one thing you don't want to rely on is somebody else that could become unreliable in the future.
Well,
which might be uncomfortable for you to hear because that's what you want. You want a diversified supply chain agenda, and you can't have it because I'm frightened of what's going to happen.
Well, I think I disagree with you, Richard. There's been talk of the friendshoring and nearshoring, and some of that is happening. But I say that perhaps we can do even better than that, because if you count on friends, we've seen in this very difficult world that a friend today may not be a friend tomorrow. Who is a friend? Therefore, I think it's better to look for those countries in different parts of the world ready to receive business, ready to receive manufacturing, and actually diversify your supply chains to those countries. So it's not just China plus one. That's what many people say, China plus Vietnam, China plus Indonesia. But you have Bangladesh, you have Pakistan, where in this region, you've got Saudi Arabia, you've got the Gulf countries here that are ready to receive business. You have African countries ready to receive business. A lot is happening in Morocco. And I could go on and on. So why not build resilience globally rather than just look at nearby countries?
But if it's something essential to your economy or to your health and welfare, you're going to want to do it yourself at home.
Well, inevitably.
Because isn't that, I mean, whether it was toilet paper at one minor level or masks at another level, countries like the United States realized that they were seriously lacking in basic production techniques.
Well, look, I mean, there will be inevitably some reshoring. You know, there are countries that figure that some things are very central to their security. They might reshore some of those. But I'm saying as a general principle that building resilience globally is probably safer, because when we reshore, if you reshore all things, you're also vulnerable. What if there's a climate event that, you know, disturbs your production processes and your manufacturing? Then what happens if you're relying on yourself for everything? Anyway, I want to say, Richard, that in spite of the talk and the impacts we've seen on trade, that actual facts on the ground show some resilience of supply chains and of the multilateral trading system.
You're halfway through your term, aren't you?
Yes.
What do you want to do for the second half of your term?
Oh. First, I want to build on the success we've had in the first half, for which I'm very grateful to WTO members. We broke the back of decades of not being able to reach multilateral agreements. In June last year, we were able to reach the first agreement on sustainability at the WTO by negotiating.
You had to lock them all up in a room. Literally, she did. She had to lock them all up in a room, promise to throw away the key, and they weren't getting anything to eat unless they reached an agreement of sorts.
Well, we got the first agreement to do away with $22 billion in harmful fisheries subsidies, which lead to illegal and unreported fishing and harm the sustainability of our oceans and our fisheries. That had been being negotiated for 2 decades, and we got that. We got an agreement, like I told you, for food security to help the WFP have better access to food supplies to feed those who are more than 349 million people who are food insecure in the world. Just 2 examples.
Right, but
so we build on that. We build on that. I want to build on that in the next couple of years. We have a second wave of the fisheries subsidies to negotiate. We have an agricultural agreement to negotiate. We have over $500 billion in agricultural subsidies that are going in the wrong direction. We need to look at that and see how that is distorting trade and how that can help food security improve.
What's your big vision?
We have the dispute settlement system.
Dispute settlement. This is the bit where countries can take each other to the WTO. Now, there's only one problem. You've got time to get married, divorced, have children, grandchildren, and probably get married again before anything will come out of the dispute system.
Well, that is why it needs reform. It's the only place in the world where members of the WTO can bring each other if they have trade disputes. Small countries have voice, big countries have voice. But we need to reform it, we need to make it faster, nimbler, and we've actually gotten a promise in June that we will reform it by 2024, and we're on our way.
Right. The US, of course, has wanted to reform this trade disputes process for decades. Can you say that reforming don't look so worried, can you say that reforming the disputes process is one of your priorities for the rest of your term?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I hope we can deliver that. I just want to say that the US is leading right now the WTO technical level discussions to try and elicit from other members how do they see these reforms, because it's not only the US that has problems. Developing countries, especially the least developed, find it hard to access the system and costly. So how can we do all these reforms so we can take into account all the worries, not just of the US or the EU, but also of poorer countries? And yes, this is an objective I have.
2 years. I mean, you know, according to some, the Almighty made the world in 7 days. So you've got 2 years to do it. I guess this is sort of a personal question. It really becomes down to the ability to put your political capital, your ability to push this forward as being the priority. Can you do that?
Well, I would hope so. It's not going to be an easy task, but I think that I would say 99% of WTO members want this system reformed. And it's a member-driven organization. Once you can galvanize that wish for reform, that to transform, I think we can get it done. I hope I'm not being too optimistic, but you know me, I'm an optimist by nature. And if you're not optimistic and passionate, you'll not get anything done.
I think optimism and passion is a perfect way to say, Director General, thank you.
Thank you, Richard.